So I want to tell you how happy I am to have the honor of sitting at this table with the most amazing women who are the part of the history and the creation and the success of Dallas Women's Foundation. So I want to thank each of you for taking the time to have this conversation and to tell you how much you mean to this organization today, as much as you meant when it started. So I thank you for that, and I want to start with the simple question to everyone, which is, what made you do it? And Becky, I'll start with you as our leading president of the organization. What made you take on this role?
Really what made me do it was Vivian and Mara McNeil and some of the older women who had started the foundation. I had been there, but they were staunch feminists and had labels all over them. And they realized that this new organization needed to be broader than what they represented. And they sort of pushed me to the front as a new face that wasn't as well known and was more of a blank slate, I guess, to be, to attract a much wider array of participation. And we worked so hard in the beginning on diversity on that board, and I think that's something we should all be very proud of, and I think it's still the case. So it was sort of the old guard turning over to a new kind of feminism, to the new guard, is how I saw it.
Loved it.
Yeah.
And then next you came. So
Next I came. I was honored. In fact, I was overwhelmed to be asked to serve as head of the board. And I remember saying to Pat Sabin to this day, I don't know if I can do this. She said, oh, you can. She was so and is so empowering, because if you think you can't, you talk to someone like Pat and you say, oh, yes, you can. But I was very lucky because I learned a lot through the initial grants process. My dear friend Becky, with whom I've gone to church many years, said, there's this wonderful organization starting, and would you come help volunteer and help us figure out about grants? Well, yes, I did, and got to work with women who were legends. We talk about Joy Mankoff and Jenny Whitehill, and we visited foundations and learned how to do our grant making and the very seminal ideas of how you get started in such an important process. My volunteer years had always been spent in the trenches with girls and women, and here was sort of a capstone to that, and I treasure that memory today. I'm very honored.
Oh. And next came you, Matilda.
Yes. Well, like Sharon, I was incredibly honored to be elected to serve as president of the Women's Foundation. I was in my 20s.
Were you?
Wow.
I was in my 20s, and the idea that I could step up in a leadership role and lead an organization of 1,500 strong, dynamic, intelligent women, it took a lot of confidence. And like Sharon said, Pat was always there to give us the confidence to do it. But I think the diversity part of it, that electing me early on in the foundation history, it's a strong signal to the community that we mean it, we are sincere, that this is a place that is embracing, it is inclusive, and we invite women of all color to come and take part, and there's a place for you here. So it was an exciting time, and it was a privilege to be in that role.
How great. And Anne, what about you?
Well, I was also honored, I can say ditto to all of the other comments, but I'd been working in the financial education area of the foundation, and it felt like a continuation of what I'd started and what I really believed in. I was also young, but I was newly widowed, and I had to take on a role in my family that I wasn't prepared for. And I wanted other women to talk about money, because at that point, women were not really talking about their own money. So we had the conversation, and out of that came our financial education program. Yeah.
I love that. And Gloria, what about you?
First of all, I remember going to a Dallas Black Chamber of Commerce banquet, which they had annual banquets back then, huge banquets. And on this particular year, I think it was about 1990, Joseph Lowry, who was the president of Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was the keynote speaker. He was talking about social and racial and economic justice for people in the community. And one of the comments he made was, when the door opens, you must step through it. And I thought, goodness, there are several opportunities that I've been offered over the years that I said no to. So the message I was getting was I should have said yes. And I think it must have been late 84 or early 85 when we had the event at Helen Hunt's mother's home in Lakewood, and over 200 women were invited. And one of the first impressions I had was that there was diversity in the room. There were so few places in Dallas where you would go to big meetings where you would see that kind of diversity. Usually I was one of two, possibly. There was a lot of diversity in the room. And when I heard the presentation about the need to help women develop a sense of self-sufficiency, to be able to promote women in society, to help them be able to manage their own money, as opposed to having their brothers or fathers or sons do it for them, it rang a bell with me, because it was something that was a theme unnoticed in my own life. It rang a bell. There was this resonance there. So I got very, very excited about the idea that I could engage in a project that would help me help women and girls.
And you, my friend Pat, what made you choose to take on the job of this little fledgling magic organization?
Well, the short answer I was asked, but that there's a little longer story. I was very blessed. I moved to Dallas in the late 70s, and I got involved with the League of Women Voters, and I was president of the League in 83, 85. And through that, I got to know most of these fabulous women, not only at this table, but in Dallas. So I knew the founders. I had worked closely with many people. And it was perfect. I really was thinking of going back to work because I'd always worked most of my life. And so I applied, and I was hired, and I accepted. And we opened the doors officially. My first official day of work was September 1st, 1985.
But let's talk about that, about the defining precepts of the organization, you know, the fact that, you know, we were founded around the concepts of diversity and inclusion. We were founded around the concept of need for support. And also the thread of financial literacy, financial and economic stability, economic justice. What was that conversation like in those early days of saying this is where our focus must be?
Some of that
Riff into
started
that.
with our initial awareness that we were not funded, women's organizations and girls' organizations were not funded at an equitable level. And I thank the early leaders and those 19 founders for putting that lens on it.
Yeah.
So
When I came on, that seed idea had already been planted, because social and economic self-sufficiency for women and girls was just basic.
But it was in other cities more than it was here, and it was still men drove the money, and we weren't talking about money very much. I think that was the missing piece. There were other services for women. The money part was not, and the financial services part was not so available to women. It was still men managed the money. If you inherited it, if you earned it, and if you were a partner, it was still mostly men managing money.
I think the underlying theme was empowerment, and money was a big piece of that. But when we realized how few dollars were going to agencies serving women and girls, many of us had served on boards of those agencies and knew how hard it was to raise money. And I'll never forget, we met with a man who was head of one of the big community foundations, and he tried to discourage us from starting our own why would you start your own foundation? And we just decided, by golly, we're just going to do it. We had no idea what we were getting into, truly. If we had known, I don't know that we would have gone there, but it was this sense of outrage, really, that if the men aren't going to give the money to the causes we care about, then we're going to raise our own money and do it. So, but the word money was not in our mission statement for the longest time. But later on, we added it, that our mission was to raise money and give grants.
Right.
We just put it out there.
And in the beginning, we didn't use the word advocacy. We spent hours debating what that meant. And I remember meeting personally with a very outstanding Texas leader discussing that concept of advocacy over lunch. Could we do that? We had to earn our street creds before we could go out and be advocates. And part of that is that growing sense of we need to be equitable in our society in understanding money, using money, giving money, getting money. And I think the Dallas Women's Foundation has been a movement in this community. I'll use the word now, catalyst. We're now advocates and we're now catalysts for change 32 years later.
In the very beginning, we decided that we needed to raise $30,000. And Sharon Baca stood up, and if you remember Sharon, she was very commanding presence.
Yes.
And she said, "Are you kidding? 30,000 will last 15 minutes. We need 100,000." And the whole meeting changed, and we, in fear and trembling, said, "Oh, well, okay, maybe we can raise 100,000." That was in August, and I think by the year end, by December, we had raised 100,000, much to our own surprise.
I remember that the inaugural luncheon raised 50,000.
Yes.
Did it?
that.
But we had 1,200 charter members, each of whom gave $1,000.
$1,000. Yeah.
And when we began, people would say, "Well, how can I join?"
I know.
Exactly.
And it
Perennial question.
kind of dawned on us eventually, members, they pay dues, and that might pay the rent, But that Southern, I guess, or woman thing about joining, we took
We're
advantage.
connectors. That's
Yeah.
what we wanted to be,
Yeah.
and to network. And that's still true.
And it served us well. We truly had not thought, speaking of basic budgeting, we had not really thought about our
Infrastructure.
own basic budget. And so we were all learning about money management together, running a business. This was running a business.
As the foundation has grown up, it's moved away from membership, but that was the connecting factor, I think, during those early years.
There was always an
Early
issue
middle.
of how do I get involved, even today,
I think that's true.
because there are sort of limited
Opportunity.
positions on committees or on the board. That's always been kind of a
Yes.
But the grants process, I think,
Yeah.
plays a
That
big role
opened
for
it up.
people wanting to learn more
Yes.
about their
Yes.
respective community. And I
Yes.
think it's,
Yeah.
I went through that process about 4 or 5 years ago again, and I was aghast at oh, this is so sophisticated. This is so fabulous. This is so powerful. How do we manage those first $5,000 grants?
Yes.
I remember Rue Henry and I going, 25,000, we've got to do this in a very secure way. 25,000. And now look,
And that was year one.
that was year one.
We always decided we were going to give grants from the get-go,
Yes.
and we were going to
Yes.
work on an endowment. And we settled on 3.5 million because this is how we did the math. We thought we would invest that, and we would make 10%. And that would provide $350,000 a year. And my gosh, how could we ever need more than $350,000
Would be
a
a piece
year?
of cake to operate.
Yeah.
Don't think I was-
And it was very hard to get to the 3.5. Nobody's going to give you endowment money when you're 2 years old or
And
5.
you can't, that's right.
But again and again, we had
It's
to
a
keep
learning
proving
curve.
ourselves, probably at a different level than Salesmanship Club.
Oh,
just
absolutely.
Just as an example.
Absolutely. What did we give last year?
4.4 million.
4.4 million.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Arlene got the crew grant
Right.
that
It was fabulous.
People came forward with lots of opportunities for us to consider, but we were always very strategic in our decision making and careful that it would be in alignment with the mission of the organization. And I thank Pat for that because, you know, she was always a sounding board that we would run these things past her, and we just stayed real clear and be intentional about our purpose and our mission. And if it wasn't in alignment with our mission, we had to say no.
But you know, we're bringing up so many things I think that differentiated us from so many other groups. And that will, when all of this together tells you why the Dallas Women's Foundation is what it is today. But another early discussion that I think was very important during the first 10 years and that contributed to our ability to be diverse was we were not an issues-oriented organization. We did not take stands on issues so that no one had an excuse not to join us.
That's right.
So
That's
if there
important
were
point.
controversial issues out there, you could be at our table, they weren't discussed, and everyone was welcome.
That's part of having that solid base to start.
Yes, I agree.
And it made us very different from the other women's
Sure,
funds
that's right.
out there because they were all
Issue.
more issue oriented and thought something was wrong with us. And we said,
Yes.
you don't understand Dallas, Texas.
We are operating in Dallas, Texas.
But-
That's our
we have
lens.
to-
Our issues were being addressed through the grants process.
Yeah.
Yes.
they were
That's where we
definitely
That's-
focused.
those
That's
were our
where we
issues.
reviewed.
Mhm.
We had guidelines about if you didn't hit the 75% women and girls being
Mhm.
recipients of that
We were
grant,
firm.
you were,
You were firm.
you were excluded.
and people knew that we would monitor those grants. Like the crew grant,
Absolutely.
we're convinced that if the agency that received the money didn't do what they said they would do, we would call them on it.
Sure.
And I think there was some confidence
confidence there.
for all the organizations, TI and Exxon and all the other companies.
I would say, Gloria, we also carried out our mission through our selection of speakers. You know, so you know that diversity there was also implemented through our speakers as well, and the message they brought.
The wisdom of the founders was that we would raise money and give grants to demonstrate who we were. And we would also, 50% of the money raised would go into an endowment to preserve us into the future.
It grew.
It grew.
Yes.
Yes.
I know that Arlene.
And it is at what point today?
The overall endowment, overall assets are at 33 million. Of that, the endowment is 13.3 if you include the field of interest, and then donor advised funds comprise another about 11 million, and it's 2 million in operating investments.
Yeah. We did things right.
Yes,
we really did.
absolutely
We did things
The
right.
most
Lot of good minds.
most exciting thing was the first woman that wrote a check for $1 million. That took me by surprise, and it meant that we had shattered that notion that women don't own their money and don't have a say in how to give it. And the philanthropy piece was kind of sealed at that point, I thought.
Shattered a glass ceiling. there.
Really.
One of the fears when we started was that here's the pie, and that we were going to
Remember this
come in
discussion.
and pull out a big piece of it, money that was already going to women and girls in other organizations. We had to prove that we were going to make the pie bigger.
That's right.
And that's an ongoing thing, but especially in the beginning.
That's an important
Competition.
distinction you're
That was-
making because
yeah.
we worried
Yeah.
about Girls Incorporated, YWCA, the women of de Tocqueville at United Way. We had meetings with some of the organizations because I think that is the difference for Dallas Women's Foundation. Pie has been made bigger. There
But
are
that
more
wasn't the perception
No.
at the beginning. There was a
No,
lot
absolutely
of
was not
competition.
the perception,
Yes.
and the issue was very different because
Yeah.
that pie was not very big in Dallas, Texas at the time. There were some groundbreaking
Right.
decisions.
And the Women and Girls funding was all lumped into the human services pie. It was never separated out that you could really look at the percentage that directly went to Women and Girls program. I think that we were also helpful with crystallizing that thinking on the behalf of the funders. So if we had the data, that was the other thing that that gave me the confidence to go out and to ask for the gift, and also the women that we know that they're more likely to be charitable. So I think the Women's Foundation gave them the confidence that you can discuss it with your husband. You don't even have to. You can also make a decision about the philanthropy in your household, and you can make it strategic, and it's okay if it just goes to women and girl programs because it's needed. The data gives us that.
And I think awareness, we brought that awareness to this
Yes, we did.
community. It wasn't in any other
We
arena
did.
at that time.
That's right. No, I still go to the website when I'm looking for data. I do.
It cuts through the noise.
Yes, it does.
It makes the Women's Foundation different.
Yes, it makes the case.
I
know?
remember a board retreat about probably 8 or 10 years ago, and Robbie Rayfield was on the board, and she stood up and said, "We ought to be marching on Austin," and everybody went, "Oh my gosh!" And sure enough, we are now, and so we've learned
That's right.
how to ask for money, big gifts, include men, how to do research, and then how to use it to march on Austin. And-
Systemic change. We
Mhm.
can make systemic change
Mhm.
by being informed and being together.
Yeah.
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 I was really kind of wanting y'all to talk a little bit more about, when you went out in the community, who said no? What was the tide turner, for opinion? Who were resistant, and then what were some of the tide turners, like you said, the data being one key one.
It was, I would just say, very gradual over 30 years. I mean,
Yeah.
it's still going on today. And I think our diversity pulled us along. Had we just focused on white women of wealth, we never would have moved
And it,
5 inches.
No.
But that diversity pulled us along.
Yeah.
I look at the board list today and I say, wow, we've done it. We're all here. We're very much accepted now into the Dallas community as a legitimate and desirable organization to participate with. People see it. We don't have to worry about the gap anymore.
Well, I think
became a part of
economic
it.
pressure too, with increasing numbers of women active in professional roles and increasingly back in the workforce at higher and higher levels.
Our founding in '85, if you look at the growth in this country of women being promoted to higher positions in corporate America, it's the same curve. And so we moved with that curve.
We did move
because
with that
all our
curve.
corporate funding came because women were usually given the community services slot.
Right.
So we would go visit the women in
Yes.
corporations
Right.
and we would get funding.
Spheres of influence
So-
versus spheres of power. Yes.
and the other thing about our diversity, which was unique in Dallas, was we had volunteer women, community volunteers, and women in business and entrepreneurs. And they met each other for the first time. So it all kind of gelled, but timing has a lot to do with it.
does.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot to do with it.
Ross, I want to say that we should not sell ourselves short. If we got the appointment with a big CEO in this city, we went out and we charmed them until they were neutral. We did. And it gave us great pleasure. But we left with the sponsorship dollars, with a donation. But Becky and Pat always had the right answer. We were unwavering. We knew our stuff, and we charmed them until they said yes.
And we were prepared.
Yes, we were.
We knew how things worked.
Yes, that's right.
Oh.
You have to adapt to where
You have to adapt, absolutely.
That was the key.
Uh-huh.
And that was
A
a
proud
memorable
moment is
day.
because of what you've done and all of that you've done. You, as our leader today and the board today, can talk about and work on some of the issues we couldn't get to: human trafficking, single women living in poverty, wage discrimination, inequity. Thank goodness for the Dallas Women's Foundation to keep the lens on those issues that hold the quality of life back for families.
Yeah. Thank you for being
Yes.
being here.